Welcome to my Antarctic video. Shirley and I just got back from Antarctica a few days ago, and we'd like to share some of our experiences and images we had on our trip there. I know most of our friends and relatives have never been to Antarctica before, and hope this will give you a little bit of a taste of what it's like to have this kind of fantastic vacation. The first day of our cruise was actually our third day of traveling. To get from San Francisco to Antarctica required us to fly first to New York City, 2-hour layover, then fly to Buenos Aires, Argentina. At that point we checked in the Hilton Hotel for about a very short 15-hour stay. Had to leave the next morning at 3 a.m. to catch our 6 a.m. flight to Ushuaia. We did have a brief period for about 3 or 4 hours to walk around the harbor near where the Hilton Hotel was, but we didn't really get to do much sightseeing in Buenos Aires. The flight from Buenos Aires to Ushuaia was basically overcast most of the way, but the clouds did part about 20 minutes before we landed, and we saw some beautiful scenery of some of the Tierra del Fuego mountains surrounding the city. Once landing, we got on the bus, got to the ship and checked in very smoothly. We've been on Viking many times before. It's always a very efficient process. Had a quick lunch at the very beautiful World Cafe. And then we had about 3 or 4 hours to spend. We decided to go into town. Ushuaia is right next to the pier, so we just walk off the pier and we're right there in the downtown Ushuaia. We had a chance to do a little bit of shopping and look around and prepare for the sail-off. The initial sailing from Ushuaia is down the Beagle Channel, which is a very well-protected, sheltered waterway that had a very smooth sailing and a beautiful sunset. I really like the mountain scenery on either side of the channel because it has some very nice rugged rocks and snow at the top, but dense forest at the bottom. The tree line at this latitude is only about 1,000 feet, whereas in California the tree line is about 10,000 feet, so it's really unique to see this kind of special scenery. But overall, a very nice first day. Two of our cruise was spent sailing to Antarctica. The passage of water we go through is called the Drake's Passage, which is notorious for being one of the most rough seas on the whole planet. The continent of Antarctica is surrounded by a very strong current, and therefore the waves are very tall because there's no continent to block it or any landmass to block it. So that part of the passage can be either relatively calm or very stormy, depending on the conditions of the seas. Those two conditions are called the Drake Lake, when it's very smooth, and the Drake Shake, when it's very rough. Fortunately for us, we had a Drake Lake today because the water was fairly calm and not too rough. I did not need to take any of my seasick medicine. We did a Zodiac landing on an island called Half Moon Island. We originally were scheduled to arrive at this Half Moon Island location in the afternoon, but because we made better time than expected crossing the Drake's Passage, we actually started in the morning. This was our first episode of learning that whatever was scheduled ahead of time on the website had very little to do with reality. Every single day we were always concerned about weather, waves, locations, so the schedule was pretty much made day by day. The island that we visited had a lot of penguins. The way the situation was, the penguins mostly had their nests up top in a rocky area. They had a long snowy slope where they walked down toward the sea and they went into the sea for feeding. The crew from the Viking went out first and scouted the area before any passengers went there and set out poles and to demarcate the areas that we could and could not go to. But overall, we had a very good viewing area for the penguins and saw a lot of penguin activity, and we were quite pleased with that part. This particular island was mostly chinstrap penguins. There are, I believe, 17 different species of penguins, and this one had mostly chinstrap penguins, but we did see a group of 3 Adele penguins, which was quite rare for this location. We were allowed to stay on the island about an hour before the next group of Zodiacs came in and took their turn on the island. About 2/3 through their stay on the island, there was some commotion out in the bay about 500 yards away. One of the expedition leaders had noticed that there was a seal who had caught a penguin and was about ready to have them for lunch. I was able to use my telephoto lens on my camera to actually get some pretty decent shots of what was happening. It's kind of gruesome to think the penguin would end his day like that, but you have to realize this is a wild area, this is the nature of life, things do eat other things, and unfortunately that's the cycle and balance of life. We saw that firsthand with this penguin and this seal. On day 4, we visited H.O. Island. This was an island that was always planned to be a Zodiac cruise, not a Zodiac landing. So we were able to cruise around a nice, fairly shallow bay and saw a lot of seals along the shoreline. And we also saw some penguins, but not as much as we did on the first island we visited. There was a nice blue-eyed shag bird up on the cliffs that I got a few pictures of, and then we started cruising out to the middle of the harbor. At that point, I saw a seal pop his head up not very far from our boat, and also some penguins about 50 yards away. For a minute there I was afraid we might have another repeat of what I saw yesterday with a seal having his lunch right in front of us, but fortunately the seal didn't seem to care too much about the penguins, and the penguins didn't care too much about the seal, and everybody lived happily ever after. One of the things I was hoping to film would be the penguins jumping out of the water. It was called porpoising. I finally was able to see the activity, but it was about 400 or 500 yards away, very, very far away. I took a few pictures of it, but none of them were very good because it was too far away to get good detail. But I did at least see some of that activity. Once back on the ship, we normally had a scientific type lecture every day at 3 p.m. in the beautiful auditorium. Today's lecture was about whales. We learned a lot about a species of whale called the fin, F-I-N whale. It's the second biggest whale, second only to the blue whale. 40 minutes through a 45-minute lecture, when the captain announced on the loudspeaker there was a pod of whales in front of the ship. So pretty much everybody left the auditorium at the very end of the lecture to see the whales, so the lecturer just kind of gave up, threw her hands up in the air and said, I guess that's the end of my lecture. We all saw a decent amount of fin whales out near the front of the ship. For dinner tonight, Shirley and I had a very nice dinner at Manfredi's Italian restaurant. It so happened to be my 70th birthday that day, so we had a little celebration. They actually made a little cake for me, which was a quite nice little surprise for me. For day 5, the original plan was to do a Zodiac cruise, and our original scheduled time was 8:30 in the morning. However, the weather turned somewhat bad with a lot of snow and not very good visibility. So we woke up that morning. We weren't moving very far because the ship will not proceed if it doesn't have a good visual view of where it's going to go. Even with all the modern sensors and radars and everything, they're still concerned about striking a large iceberg which might damage the ship. One activity they did go through is they did release a weather balloon at 8 a.m. The Viking Cruise family is very interested in science, and that's one small way they can help contribute to scientific knowledge is to release these weather balloons twice a week, and we have to watch that happen.
People have asked me how cold was it in Antarctica. The simple answer, it was always 33 degrees. In reality, it never went below 30 or above 35, but the temperature is very consistent. This balloon ceremony lasted about 15 minutes, and most people were wearing their supplied parka and pants, and I was quite comfortable with this layer of clothing. Everybody's tolerance is a little bit different. Some people can tolerate it very well, and some people not so much, as you can see from this picture of these two women.
In the afternoon, we tried to enter a bay so we could do at least some kind of activity on the water with Zodiacs and kayaks and so forth. However, the entrance to the bay was blocked by several large icebergs. And even though theoretically we might be able to wiggle between them and get into the bay, there was a ship in the last couple of weeks that got into the bay and had to spend 24 hours there because the wind changed and more icebergs blew in and they couldn't get out. So the captain did not want to take that chance. So the alternative to actually being on the water, the captain sailed further south, and we got to see more sea ice. That's a very thin layer of ice on the surface that the ship can sail through because it's not a big iceberg. I also saw a phenomenon called sea snow, which I've never seen before, and that's where the snow will land, fall on the surface of the ocean, and not melt because the water is so cold. Very interesting phenomena. Day 6 was supposed to be a scheduled day for kayaking, submarines, Zodiacs, and like a full day of activity. We woke up in the morning and we were basically parked in the middle of the ocean, not near any obvious landing sites. And the cruise director came on about 8 a.m. and said they think they found a spot we can land to see some penguins. This was not on the original itinerary. It's a place called Breakwater Island. And the ship's captain and crew had to contact IATO for permission to land on that island. they received the permission, they also were notified that no other cruise ship had ever landed tourists on that island before. So it was a completely virgin island as far as tourism goes, which was exciting. Part of the reason why no one probably cruised there before is not very easily accessible from Zodiacs. The crew from our ship had to go out there and basically use snow shovels to create a stairway up about 35 steps from the water's edge to the plateau where the penguins were. So you had to basically create a stairway out of the snow and ice. But it was very neat. We got up to the very top and saw a lot of penguins there. Got some of our best penguin photos right there.
Bunch of penguins everywhere here. Everywhere you look, more penguins.
And some of the gentle penguin, different speed. Oh, there's a bird. The white bird.
This penguin wanted to check us out, but was a little bit clumsy.
Pretty neat, huh?
This is the island that had the best penguin viewing, so I decided to bring my full camera gear, both camera bodies and a cell phone with a gimbal. And I was glad I took all this equipment because I got some really great shots. One part of the cliff had some nesting birds where the penguins seemed to be very close to the edge. I was curious how could the penguins avoid falling off and killing themselves on a regular basis. I looked more closely at their feet and I could see how they do have pretty good traction on rocky areas. Penguins build their nest on the top of the island in protected areas using small rocks. All the good small rocks have already been taken up there, so they have to walk all the way down to the shoreline, pick up one rock at a time, and walk about 100 yards back to where their nest is. They do this over and over again.
Building that nest.
because that was somewhat of a strenuous scramble up that hillside to get to the top, they also had an alternative location where we can go. It's much flatter, but not as good of a selection of scenery. So, but that was an alternative for people who had somewhat more limited mobility. But overall, a very good day. The original plan for day 7 was to visit Base Brown, actually on the continental mainland of Antarctica. We woke up this morning and it was snowing and 40-mile-an-hour winds, so it's pretty obvious we weren't going to be able to do that kind of activity today. So the captain made a decision to go to a different, more sheltered bay where we might be able to do some of the water activities. And we did go to a nice, more sheltered, calm water bay. And we're on a Zodiac when doing a cruise around the area, trying to look for whales, whatever wildlife we could find. The last part of that Zodiac cruise was very beautiful, with the sea ice all around us, looking very beautiful with gentle little waves.
In icy bits like this, yes, this is no problem for them. When it is a little thicker and becomes sheet ice, they do have slight problems with it. Of course, whales need to come to the surface to breathe. And so,
About 45 minutes into our 1-hour cruise, the weather turned relatively suddenly and became windy, and the waves grew quite a bit bigger. So at that point, all the remaining Zodiac cruises for that day were canceled. So if you weren't in the first half of the boats going out that day, you weren't able to get off the ship. But we had a very nice little cruise and some beautiful scenery.
The weather in Antarctica often changes very suddenly. Sure enough, about 2 hours after we got the last Zodiac back on board our ship, the weather started to clear up and we were treated with some spectacularly beautiful scenery because the hills around us were now sunlit, whereas the majority of the trip had been covered with clouds.
Day number 8 was Fournier Bay and Demoy Point. We woke up in the morning, we were already parked in a nice little bay, fairly calm waters, and had a chance to take a Zodiac out to the landing site. There's some rocky outcroppings in shallow water where the penguins were enjoying themselves. We saw one seal laying up on the snow above where the penguins were, basically lounging around. The main point of interest for this particular location was the hut where the British government had a observation point where scientists would stay for weeks and months at a time. It's not currently occupied right now, but it still is equipped like it was when they actually had the people there with the cooking utensils out. So it's really interesting to see what that looked like.
We had a chance to get a few nice penguin pictures.
Ironically, this beach landing, it was the same location where the Viking cruise ship one week later had an accident that set in motion a chain of events that led to a tragedy. I'll tell a little bit more about that at the very end of this video, but this is the location where the Zodiac accident happened. We did get to see a fair number of humpback whales, and I took some pictures with my camera, and there is a scientific project called Happy Whales, where you're supposed to take a picture of a humpback whale, mainly the tail, which has unique scarring and markings that make each whale unique. It's almost like a fingerprint. And you submit that data to time and date, where you were, and that tail, and they can track whales that way, based on what the appearance of their tail. So I did submit a few shots to help in that scientific project. Day 9 was the day that we actually visited Base Brown. This was the only visit of all the landings we did that actually was on the mainland continent of Antarctica. All the other 3 landings were on islands off the continent. To me, that did not make a huge difference, but some people really wanted to actually say they landed on the continent of Antarctica, so it was important for some people to do this landing. The night before, we had our normal 5:30 p.m. briefing by the expedition director, and he showed us this projected wind map for the next couple of days of the weather, and it showed a huge storm coming down toward the Drake's Passage. And the captain did not want to get stuck in a huge storm, but she also wanted to try to give as many people a chance to land on the continent as possible. So we did kind of a compromise. We did a very, very brief landing on the continent, literally maybe 3 or 4 minutes on the land, and the next crew would come in, get their pictures taken, and go out. But we saw a nice seal lounging on some ice on the way. So overall, not too bad. We actually did stand on the continent, which was kind of nice. The sail away after that was kind of very beautiful. A lot of icebergs floating around, and the ship had to be expertly navigated between each iceberg to kind of get out to where the open sea was. But I got some of my best pictures on that afternoon sailing away. Overall, a very nice day, even though the landing was very brief.
Real close to where the icebergs are right now, so the captain is moving the ship a little further away right now. Very beautiful iceberg right there.
Day 10 was sailing back across the Drake's Passage. It was definitely rougher this time than it was going, but it was not a full-blown Drake shake. It was enough for me to need to take my anti-seasickness medication, but it wasn't, enough to make me want to lay in bed all day long. The crew said this was about an average passage for what this body of water normally has.
So we went somewhere else, and what we found, a beautiful, wonderful glacier area, beautiful views with the sunshine when we turned the ship into this little brush ice. I think you all are with me. That was an amazing thing to see.
Day 11, we sailed back down the Beagle Channel toward Ushuaia. I had a chance to get some bird photographs while I was talking to the bird expert on board. We approached the city of Ushuaia itself in the middle of the afternoon. However, there's only one dock in Ushuaia. It has very limited docking capacity. There was already a cruise ship parked there, so we had to wait till it left before we could actually dock. But we had a very nice dinner on board. I started packing everything up, and the following morning everybody had to leave the ship by about 8 o'clock, so it was time to get everything ready and get ready to go. But overall, a very nice trip.